real estate can allow us to design a life, but ultimately it's about who you are and about who you become. And that's a gift that I think most of us don't recognize until maybe a few years into this whole journey, is that who you become is actually a more valuable experience. And then the success continues to follow and compound behind that. But, those are some of the patterns that I observed. And when I started reading the books, books like Think and Grow Rich and Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I started to really go down the path of, well, wait a minute, the more I learned, the more I realized that I didn't know. And the more I realized I didn't know, my curiosity just spiked. And so it just became this joy, this thing that I didn't really ever realize was deep inside me. But I think it's deep inside all of us. Is that we want to know more. We're on a journey. We're all seeking. We're all on our own part of our own journey. So that's kind of my experience with the mindset, mind expansion, and personal development piece.
This is the Real Estate Vibe Show, and I'm your host, Winky Loomba, a real estate investor. And today I have a very good friend of mine, Tyler Chesser, with me.
It's so great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really excited about today.
Me too. So a little bit about Tyler. Tyler is a co-founder and managing partner of CF Capital, a private equity real estate investment firm that focuses on acquiring and operating multifamily assets that provide stable cash flow, capital appreciation, and a margin of safety. Tyler is also the creator and host of the popular Top 200 podcast, Elevate, where he hosts discussions with world-class investors and other experts decoding mindset and mind expansion and personal development for high-performing real estate. And today we'll discuss your vibration with Tyler. Right, Tyler?
I love it. Well, it's so interesting that your show is all about the vibration around real estate. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of people may kind of shake their head and say, "Oh, come on, that's woo-woo, this is corny," but at the end of the day, if you really break it down, if you really look at what the scientists have showed us, everything is energy. Everything is energy, even to the basic level of matter. Solid particles. I mean, it's a vibration. And so if you want to create something, we've got to understand that everything is energy and really a vibration. So I'm excited that we're starting there, Vicky.
Awesome. Me too. I'm very excited as well. So can you briefly share your background with us? How did you become who you are today?
Sure. I got into real estate about 9 years ago. And when I got into real estate, I was actually leaving the corporate world. I was actually doing international marketing for a Fortune 500 organization. I was kind of climbing that corporate ladder, and I was a few years into that climb, and I kind of looked around and I said, wait a minute, am I actually climbing the right ladder? I looked around and I said, well, wait a minute, do I want to be where that person is? Do I want to be where that person is? And do I want to wait 25 more years to get to that corner office, which in my mind was the goal? And kind of reflecting back at that point, it was almost like, well, wait a minute, why didn't I ask these questions earlier? But I was always kind of taught that, growing up, that going to school, getting good grades, would lead to getting a good job, which then would lead to, a quality life, a safe life, and all those kind of things. And who was I to really question those things? Because, the people that knew things in my world were the ones who were telling me that. So I was just kind of listening to my surroundings. And so I found myself in this corporate world, climbing the corporate ladder. And I learned a lot about corporate America through that experience. And not all of it's positive, not all of it's negative. Don't get me wrong. But it was a lifestyle that I was not highly intrigued by after a few years in that experience. And, I would go home from working a long day, and, I would have to do a conference call with folks in the Philippines or Taiwan or the Middle East. And then I would come back, the next morning, kind of tired, exhausted from doing a late night call with folks on the other side, our partners on the other side of the world. And I would have a full day ahead of me as well. And of course, sometimes if you want to achieve big things, there's a tremendous level of commitment. but I didn't feel like I was being rewarded in the way that I would want to be. And I felt like it was going to be years and years and years before I would be living that lifestyle that I desired. And so I kind of went back to some of this innate personality traits that I had at the time. Was a bit of a rebellious sort of thought process. I looked around and I said, well, wait a minute. Why am I doing this? I shouldn't have to do this, because ultimately it was all about, I felt like, creating more results if I wanted to create more value in my life. But ultimately, I learned that the corporate world was more so about politics and really time in the saddle than actually generating more results. And that was kind of a part of the realization that drove me into making some changes. So I started to look around and I said, all right, well, what changes do I want to make, and what changes can I make? What talents do I have? What skills do I have? And I started to ask around. I started to ask people outside of myself, what do you see me talented with or skilled with? Because, it's funny, the first thing, and actually before I started to ask those type of questions, the first thing I did was get my resume ready. And it was interesting because I didn't realize that I was about to climb the wrong ladder again. And as I started to have a few interviews, I started to recognize, well, wait a minute, what are you doing? You're going to climb the wrong ladder again. And so I started to ask these questions, and I ultimately spoke to an individual who was in real estate sales, and he was selling residential real estate. And he said, hey, you know what? I think that you would be great in this line of work. I think that you should come to our seminar next week and see if it's a fit for you. And I said, why not? Why, go to this seminar and learn about real estate sales. And so ultimately I went to the seminar, and I learned that, perhaps my personality would be a good fit to translate into real estate sales. And so I went and got my real estate license and started selling houses on the side of my corporate gig. And so I was, working through the day, doing some conference calls at night, doing some conference calls early morning, but I was also growing my real estate sales business. And I didn't really know anything about real estate at the time. When I heard the words real estate, I thought of a single family house to live in. Mm-hmm. And when I started to sell these properties, I actually was able to double my income within 6 months. It took a little bit to kind of get started, and then it really started to take off. But then I doubled my income, and I said, okay, this is interesting. This is, that's a great outcome of this experience. However, it was a very emotional experience dealing with, single family home buyers and sellers, because it's their home. That's where they live. It's where they spend their, their day in, their day out. They live their life. It's an emotional experience. And so once I got my foot in that door, I said, okay, that's not necessarily exactly where I want to go, but perhaps there's a clue here, and real estate was the clue. And I looked around. Once I stepped into that sort of palace, I looked around and I said, wow, real estate could mean much more than a single family house, as we all know now, very simply. But I started to look at commercial real estate and all the different asset classes within commercial real estate and how they were valued differently than residential real estate. And it fascinated me because I came from, a very number-oriented background, a marketing background, as well as kind of a natural sort of salesperson type of personality. Those three things kind of lended itself very well to a transition in commercial real estate. So I was a commercial real estate broker for the next few years, as I then learned about the fact that, hey, wealthy people utilize real estate to generate wealth and to generate multiple streams of income in their life. And once I learned that from this guy named Robert Kiyosaki, I was like, wait a minute, I'm selling these properties. So why don't I put my money where my mouth is and start investing in those properties? So I started investing in multifamily real estate a few years into my commercial real estate brokerage career. So that's kind of it's interesting. I almost stumbled into this path, but now I've kind of created much more of a scaled sort of an experience as an investor myself.
Wow, that's a great journey. So how did you come up with the idea for a podcast about decoding mindset behind the success?
So the thing that was interesting is like transitioning from being an employee to being an entrepreneur was a huge leap. And it took me really years to really settle into finding comfort and being uncomfortable. Because in the very beginning, it was interesting, like all the things that I didn't want out of the corporate life of climbing that long ladder and dealing with the politics, I was actually shielded from a lot of the discomfort that entrepreneurs and investors face on a day-to-day basis. Because I could show up and kind of cool it or have, a mediocre sort of output, and still my paycheck was not affected. But when I became an investor, when I became an entrepreneur, it was all about my effectiveness. It was all about my output. It was all about the results. And ultimately, that was a very stressful experience early on, because it took me quite a bit of time to really build that business and to really build my reputation, to build my understanding, to build my decision-making capacity, truly to build my mastery. And through that experience, I dealt with, the highs and the lows of, hey, nothing's guaranteed. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. Just because you made an investment doesn't mean that, you're going to hit your projections. Just because you put your money to work doesn't mean that it's going to come back with friends. You've got to be effective. You've got to have mastery. And so I started to study some of the world's most successful people. And what I learned was that not only did they win the inner dialogue with their mind, but they also invested in themselves. And not only were they investors in assets and they were employing effective strategies, they were continuing to pour into themselves. And that came down to expanding their minds, finding new opportunities and new ways of solving problems, expanding their networks, expanding the dialogue or the questions that they ask themselves. Instead of saying, well, I can't do this, it's how can I? Or what could be the opposite of that belief? And so once I started to dive down that experience, it was like this never-ending thirst that couldn't be quenched, because I learned so much more about myself through that experience. And of course, I transformed my finances, but I more importantly transformed myself. I transformed who I was. I uncovered this individual that I didn't know existed. And so I wanted to share that with the world. And so now it's been about 3 years since I started Elevate Podcast. And it's been an unbelievable joy, because ultimately I believe that anything is possible in real estate. Real estate can allow us to design a life, but ultimately it's about who you are and about who you become. And that's a gift that I think most of us don't recognize until maybe a few years into this whole journey, is that who you become is actually a more valuable experience. And then the success continues to follow and compound behind that. But, those are some of the patterns that I observed. And when I started reading the books, books like Think and Grow Rich and Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I started to really go down the path of, well, wait a minute, the more I learned, the more I realized that I didn't know. And the more I realized I didn't know, my curiosity just spiked. And so it just became this joy, this thing that I didn't really ever realize was deep inside me. But I think it's deep inside all of us. Is that we want to know more. We're on a journey. We're all seeking. We're all on our own part of our own journey. So that's kind of my experience with the mindset, mind expansion, and personal development piece.
Which is really great. This, when you were talking, this question came to my mind. Now you know who you are, right? Because you took the inwards journey, and plus you became an entrepreneur from your W-2 job. So do you see any similarities? Because you can craft your life the way you want it, because you know who you are. And at the entrepreneurship level, you know how to craft your business, because you know this is you only, right? As an entrepreneurship, you only. And you can do it whatever way you want to do it. Whether it's a life or a business.
Yeah, I mean, I think that looking back, this person was always there. I just hadn't uncovered it yet. At that time, I was in my mid-20s, just kind of learning what adult life was really like. And so, I was so green to almost everything at that point in time. It was hard to say, well, if I look back, was that person there? But, now that, like, just being on the front lines of this journey, I think it truly is, it's the ups and the downs. And ultimately, it's about really winning that inner dialogue. It's what conversation are you having with yourself? Because 80% of our success, I truly believe this, is our psychology, and 20% is the mechanics or the strategy. And once we win that inner dialogue, instead of saying I can't to then I might be able to, it's almost this very, very simple shift to like, I can't, because our mind wants to tell us the negative thoughts. And in fact, if you don't realize it, 95% of our daily thoughts are negative. It's pretty fascinating. 95% of our thoughts, and we have 60 to 80,000 thoughts per day. which is absolutely mind blowing. Most of those are subconscious, most of those are merely felt in the body. And that's a vibration, by the way, right? When you feel a negative thought, you start to vibrate in a negative way. And if we could get really, really woo woo, we could talk about, the quantum physics and the quantum mechanics of that type of vibration and what type of circumstances that creates. But when you start to think in a more of a world of possibilities type of perspective, that's when things start to open up. And by the way, you start to act. And all results come from action. And ultimately, it starts from that feeling. It starts from that vibration. So that's one of the reasons why I was excited that we're talking about the vibration and really that mindset piece, because I think the mindset piece is the catalyst to the vibration, which, by the way, it results in not only action, but also all of these other things that we start to see around us.
That's so true, because your thought becomes your action, and thought is just a vibration, and there's an emotion attached to it, to your thought. And because you make most of the time, all your actions or reactions are based on emotions. So the control that you're trying to talk about, in your mind, to look at your thoughts or pay attention to your thoughts and pick the right kind of thoughts, that's whatever you're talking about, that's all important. But at the same time, most of the time people think they cannot deal with it. They cannot control that because they're so entangled within it. They're just like in the thought, not outside to observe it and alter it or align the energy according to their actions. It's very hard. So if you can talk about that a little bit.
Yes. So Marcus Aurelius shared this quote over 2,000 years ago. I believe it was either him or Seneca. I think it may have been Seneca. So I apologize. I hope they're not rolling over in their graves right now. But they said that between stimulus and response, there's space. And so I think that's what most people don't realize, or they are not mindful enough of, is that between a certain event and your response, there is a space that you can create and you can make wider and wider. Now, this is through practice. I mean, this does not happen overnight, but we all have this ability as human beings to recognize that, well, wait a minute, if something negative happened or you perceive that to be negative, right? You can either go down that path and you can ruminate and you can spiral downwards, or you can observe that and say, oh, that's really interesting that I feel this way about that event, this external event. And so we have the choice to respond in a certain way. But it starts with realizing that between that stimulus and the response, there is that space. In that space, there's a decision to say, I'm going to let this take me down, or I'm going to say, you know what, within all problems, there are gifts. Within all challenges, there are opportunities. Within all chaos, there is order. These are things that we can condition our mind to recognize. And really, you start to see, well, those thoughts are true, by the way. They are true. That's not just lying to yourself and saying, oh, think positively, all these kind of things. But it starts there. And, the other thing, too, is that we are meaning-making machines as human beings. Anything that we see, we want to place a meaning behind it. We want to make sense of the world around us. And a lot of times we have experiences that we say, well, that's bad. Today was a bad day, or this was a bad deal, or today, that was a bad conversation. And it's like, well, wait a minute, is that true? What if the opposite were true? Mm-hmm. And now once we get into that space, then we open ourselves up for growth. And, that's the thing about growth, is that it doesn't happen when we're comfortable, when we're relaxing, or when we're not experiencing any challenges or problems. Growth happens when we're uncomfortable, when we feel like, wait a minute, that was bad. So it's like, oh, I wonder why I placed that to be bad. Who told me that this type of event would be bad, right? Growth happens when we start to recognize and start to expand the space between stimulus and response. And then we start to choose. Instead of saying I'm powerless or being powerless to a certain circumstance, we then gain the control to say, what would my higher self say? What would my higher self do? What would my higher self or my future self behave in this circumstance? What would this person do? And so then now you get to choose. Instead of being the default mechanism of your environment, you start to define your environment. And when you start to vibrate at a higher wavelength to say, you know what, 2023, we've got a lot of challenges in the market, but wow, problems create opportunities.
That's true.
Chaos creates order. And now the world of possibilities exists. And now let's step into that.
That's true. There's always a silver lining. And plus, all these past experiences, that's the one is making you react on a certain situation. When I say react is when you're not pausing, when you're giving away that ability to make a decision for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when it happens. You're reacting because of the past experience, and you're not aware enough to realize that this thing is not happening right now. This was sometime past or in some past life too, and I'm just reacting based on that experience in my mind. So when you have that realization, your decisions are more positive, because if you look at the successful people, they have one thing in common: they are always positive. They have willingness to achieve something in their life, because they are not feeding their negative thoughts ever, because they have the can-do attitude. So what makes them different than the average people, if you can talk about that?
I would love to talk about that. I look at, there's, again, there's very simple shifts that you can make. And this is, I think Tony Robbins actually calls it a 2 millimeter shift. A lot of times it's very simple yet profound. It's easy to do. It's easy not to do as well. But one of the things that Tony Robbins also talks about, which has been extremely helpful in my life, is that life is happening for us and not to us.
That's true.
So in any moment, you can look at a problem or a challenge or whatever it is that you're facing and say, okay, how is this happening for me? Right? How is this happening for me and not to me? And that is a very, very simple shift, because a lot of people will say, well, I'm just not a lucky individual. Things don't typically go my way. And so life is happening to me, right? All of these things are out of my control. So woe is me. Let me throw my hands in the air. The other side of it is, well, you know what? That didn't work right now, but no doesn't mean no forever. It means not right now. It means I need to try again. It means I need to be persistent. And it means I need to have faith. It means I need to push forward, or it means that, maybe there's some feedback here that I need to take and adjust, right? There's this thing called course correction, right? Failure is not fatal, but it is feedback. It's an opportunity for us to change, adjust, grow. And so these are questions that we can ask ourselves, but it is about conditioning our mind for success. I've been sharing with you a few mantras. Like, these are things that show up for me generally on a daily basis. And it's not because, well, you know what, I've won this battle and I'm overcoming. So now let me come on the stage to say, Vinky, let me tell all your listeners about how I have conquered this battle. These are things that I use every single day. I mean, these are things that I continue to have to course correct myself, because there's days where I'm like, oh man, life is happening to me and not for me. And I'm like, wait a minute, no, that's not true. That's not true. And you know what it is? There's these things that we have, and they're called saboteurs. And what they are, they're trying to protect us. They're trying to make sure that our genes pass on to the next generation. But really what they're doing is they're stealing our dreams. And we think that we're being protected by creating these type of thoughts of everything out there is doing this to me, and it wasn't my fault, but because of those external circumstances, I can't and I won't. Once we have that recognition, we recognize that that is a saboteur. That's actually not ourselves. That's someone else. That's some other dialogue that's happening. And we're never going to get rid of this, but we can take the driver's seat and we can push the saboteur into the back seat, and we can say, thank you for trying to protect me, but no thank you, because my higher self, my future self, myself that has dreams, that has possibilities, that wants to serve other people, that wants to grow, that knows that, it's not just about survival, but it's about thriving. Once we start to win that dialogue, and really it happens over time. It's like, oh, I just won that conversation. The conversation happened again. It's like, I can't, but it's like, wait a minute, that's the saboteur just trying to protect me. Once I win that dialogue, I get stronger for the next time. And you know what? We fall off this wagon. We fall off the wagon, but we don't say, you know what? I've fallen off, so goodbye, wagon. We say, oh, wait, catch up. Let me come up and let me get back on the wagon here.
That's
so
true.
This is a big thing, I think, for investors. This is a long game. In real estate, it takes a long time to generate, the results that you're looking to create. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme. And so that's why I think that this conversation is critical, because throughout this long journey, we are really growing as individuals if we give ourselves the opportunity to win each one of those battles.
That's true. That's very important. And ask questions on the way and learn from others. My mom always told me, challenge your thoughts regularly because she was just like always reading Bhagavad Gita. Gita is the holy book in India. And it has all the knowledge of the world in there. It's applicable in today's date too. It's really, really old, thousands of years old. And then she always used to say that challenge yourself, challenge your beliefs. If your beliefs are not aligned with your reality, then have the courage to change them. Make the best out of yourself, And then she always used to say that, your beliefs or asking questions, it's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. That's how you're going to grow and expand. Because most of the people, they think like if they don't know something, they're just going to go into their shell and not ask because they feel like, oh, people are going to judge me. So if you worry about judgment, that's not growth. You're going to stop. That hinders your growth. That stops right there. So here I'm going to ask you the question with this awesome mindset, and bringing your scientific information as well in there. How did that help you in your real estate journey and become this big tycoon or success in your own space?
Well, it really, and by the way, I just wanted to comment on what you just said, change your thoughts, change your mind, and also recognize that you are not, that I am not my thoughts. That's an interesting one. Once you kind of separate that, again, it kind of correlates to between stimulus and response, there's space. Like between you and your thoughts, there is you, it's like there's actually you yourself. So it's questioning that and being willing to change your mind and change, a belief that you had from a previous held, experience. Growing up, I grew up middle class, and a lot of the things that I had that were sort of part of my belief system, I had to unlearn. And there's this unlearning experience that I think that is a necessary evolution for us to go through. So for me, how did this all manifest into results? I think it's very difficult to say where I would be without this type of immersion or this type of investment, ongoing investment into myself. I would say that I wouldn't be near where I am now. I may have, gone back to the corporate world because I remember people who said, all right, well, we'll see you here in a couple of years, when that whole real estate thing doesn't work out. And, that was motivation, of course, because I didn't want to be a failure. But also, a lot of people did not believe that what I was doing was something that could be successful. But in every single moment, there was an encounter of this, the saboteur or this demon that wanted to take away sort of my action and my positive behavior, my positive results. But I don't think that I would have been able to overcome. The first deal that I did was a big challenge. I had almost every problem in the book that you could ever imagine. Ultimately, years later, it became a success, and it's been, something that I can really hang my hat on and lean on as far as an experience to continue to grow as an investor. But, each and every deal and each and every sort of path on my whole trajectory has been encountered with challenges. And, it hasn't been a totally smooth ride. There's certainly been deals where they're home runs and it's like, wow, that was maybe a little bit easier than expected. But I think that you earn that over time. And so I don't know if I would be anywhere near where I am. And, as we kind of navigate a market cycle now, a changing set of conditions in the economy and in the market, I think that it's another challenge to step up to the plate and say, all right, well, how are we winning this internal dialogue, but also how are we continuing to think about our strategy and course correct on our strategy? So, now we run a large portfolio across the Midwest and Southeast. And, some of our assets are absolutely, crushing it, knocking it out of the park. Some other assets are having some challenges, in the current market cycle. So I think it's just a calling card to say, all right, well, you overcame those challenges, but you have not arrived. You never arrive in this business. You never arrive as human beings. And, it's just a continued growth process. So I don't know. It's fairly difficult for me to answer the question, but I don't know if that makes sense, Vinky.
No, it does. It does make perfect sense. And it is a journey. There's no destination. Because even if you reach your, let's say, $10 billion goal today, so you're not going to be stopping there. So maybe you're looking for another 100 billion now. So it's just like expansion and growth. And then it's the law of the nature, because everybody every life on this earth wants to live its full potential. Look at the plants. Even look at the rose, small little bud. It wants to open up to and live full fledged. Even it's gonna just bloom for one day.
Mm.
That's the law of nature, right? So this is a journey. And as long as we recognize that it's a journey and we are enjoying the journey, we're meeting the right people, and the people that we are meeting, they are our support. They are there to support us in some way, maybe idea, maybe thought, maybe sharing a hello, hi, whatever they're saying. So it's adding some value into our life. That's the reason we are meeting them. There's no consequences. Because this is like, remember before the podcast, we were talking about the bubbles. Like everybody has their own bubble. They live in their own bubble. How your bubble is going to grow? When you're going to meet all the bubbles around you and you're going to collaborate, then what's going to happen? Your bubble is going to be so big. That's the expansion right there. And there's no purpose in this life, only one purpose. Get to know each other, help each other grow. And that's what the true growth is. So this brings us towards the end of our podcast. So I'm going to ask you one golden nugget. So I would like to ask a golden nugget on mind decoding from you.
Ooh, I would say stay curious, ask more questions, and go deeper. Why is that? What about that did you find to be the most exciting or the most surprising? Ask questions. One of the things that I didn't do well enough early on in my journey was to ask more questions because I didn't want anybody to know that I didn't know the answer. But I think being curious and staying humble and just saying, you know what, I really want to know more, and asking more questions is a beautiful thing.
I think that's the best thing that you shared with us. And if you look at the journey of the successful people, they never say they know everything. If they do not know, they'll say, I do not know this thing. They admit that. And that's not a weakness. That's a strength. That's how you grow. So this brings us to a rapid fire round. I'm going to ask you 5 questions. You have to answer in 1 word or 1 sentence only. Okay. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. The first one. What motivates you to keep pushing forward at this point in your life?
My children.
Awesome. What one book changed your thinking and put you on the trajectory to success? Please share that with my audience.
The first one was Think and Grow Rich.
That's a good one. I like that one too. In 1 word, what does life mean to you?
Expansion.
I like that. If you can change one thing in your life, what would that be and why?
That's a good question. That's a tough one. I don't think I have any regrets. I don't think there's anything that I would change about my past. So I'll leave it at that.
I like that answer, actually. That's my answer too, because if you change something, you'll be on a totally different path.
Right. I agree.
You are here because of whatever you did in the past. Today, how would you describe yourself?
I would describe myself as willing and committed to doing whatever it takes, and abundance minded.
Love that. How can people reach out to you, Tyler?
Well, they can find me at Elevate Podcasts. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, Elevate with Tyler Chesser, whether you watch on YouTube or listen on podcast platforms. So if you're enjoying podcasts, of course, you're here listening to Vinky's podcast, you can check me out there, or you can check me out at cfcapllc.com, or you can check me out on social media at the Tyler Chesser.
Thanks, Tyler. I enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Vinky.